High stakes, high turnout, and a generational shift in U.S. politics. We're watching the dust settle on the midterm elections, with the Democrats flipping the House of Representatives, along with a whole host of key governors' races, at least 7, while Republicans consolidated their advantage in the U.S. Senate. Expect more checks and balances, along with perhaps more gridlock. We're going to be weighing the loss of the House for Donald Trump and ask if a setback in 2018 might nonetheless lead to a win in 2020. Trump lost moderate Republican strongholds, particularly in suburban areas and among women voters, while consolidating his base with a divisive campaign that included rhetoric and broadcast messages deemed racist or offensive. The new normal, or the beginning of the end for his brand of identity politics? The Democrats, too, find themselves at a crossroad. We'll see which wing of the party fared better. Is it that of 78-year-old Nancy Pelosi, the once and most probable future moderate House Speaker, or of Alexandria Ocasio-Perez, nearly half a century younger than Pelosi, a Democratic socialist who's to become the youngest lawmaker on Capitol Hill? The whole world is watching because with the midterms over, well, you might say this Wednesday is the first day of the 2020 presidential campaign. What kind of leader do Americans want going forward? What does the rest of the world want? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at what is a generational shift. With us from Washington, Republican commentator and political consultant Harlem Hill. Thank you for joining us.
Derrière moi au Congrès.
Hannah Murdoch, who researches and teaches energy and environment issues at Sciences Po, a native of Texas.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us. Thanks as well for being with us, Jérémy Gallon, the author of Journal of a Young Diplomat in Trump's America, published in French?
Yes, published in French.
Cool.
By Gallimard.
Soon to be translated.
I hope so.
Okay. And Craig Capitas, editor-at-large for TRT World. How are you?
Mon capitaine.
All right, the world, the France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, hashtag F24debate. A win or a loss, no points for guessing the take of the President of the United States after Tuesday's midterms. Donald Trump exposing his calculus and how having the Democrats in charge of the House might even be better for him, he says.
Now we have a much easier path because the Democrats will come to us with a plan for infrastructure, a plan for health care, a plan for whatever they are looking at, and we'll negotiate. And as you know, it's been very hard in the Senate because we need essentially 10 votes from Democrats, and we don't get those votes because the Democrats do really stick together well. I don't agree with them on a lot of policy, but I agree with them on sticking together. They stick together great.
Craig Capitas, do you agree with that, perhaps he can get more done with Democrats in charge in the lower house?
I have no idea what's going on in Donald Trump's brain. Classically, no, I don't think he can get anything done, but I think we have to enter any discussion of the next 2 years of the Trump administration as a continuation of a game show, another episode in the World Wrestling Federation, if you will, where he pits one side against the other. The usual concepts of politics, diplomacy, if you will, government, they just don't apply here. So this is basically what's going to happen going forward. This is not a victory for Donald Trump, and it's certainly not a victory for the Democrats. What it is a reckoning in what is a much larger civil war going on in the United States.
Because there was one striking bit in that press conference, Harlan Hill, which was the results from Tuesday night showed big wins in staunchly Republican areas for those who are close ideologically to Donald Trump. He even named it and shamed at one point moderates from the Republican Party who lost. It's now Donald Trump's party, and that's confirmed, it seems.
Absolutely, and that's a wake-up call for any holdovers from the previous Republican Party to get in line or to step aside. But I disagree with the previous commentator's take on what the next 2 years could look like. If the Democrats are willing to come to the table, the president has indicated that he's absolutely willing to do a deal with them, whether that's on health care, and he's spoken to that, as have Democrats, or on infrastructure. Both sides said that they want to get a deal done on that. Or if it's a solution to the DACA issue. I mean, the president's already said that he's willing to give permanent legal status to the DACA recipients in exchange for a wall. I mean, so a deal can be done here if Democrats keep an open mind and they don't want to be the party of obstruction and they want to have a legitimate role in governing this country.
Hannah Murdoch?
Well, I can kind of see from both sides. I think that both Republicans and Democrats are calling this a victory. Whether or not that's true, I guess we'll see pretty soon and how much is able to get done. But I think that what was a really clear message from the blue wave that was at least seen for the House is that the Republicans and the Trump administration cannot see this anymore as validation for their regulations, their policy priorities, and that at least there will be some pushback now.
So, Jeremy Guénon, I bet you have to explain this to your French friends a lot, because if you look at the results from Tuesday, I mean, in terms of actual real estate owned, it's a huge landslide for the Republicans. Of course, a lot of this red is more rural areas. The patches of blue, particularly on the coasts and near the borders, are where the Democrats won. So one side picks up more votes, the other side picks up more real estate.
Yeah, I think it's the consequence of identity politics and the huge polarization of the US. Now you have clearly the coast, West Coast, East Coast, that are more liberals, that vote for the Democrats, and the rest of the country that vote mainly Republicans. And the problem is that there is a massive divide, by the way, that you can see more and more also in Western Europe, with a divide between rural areas and urban areas, between people who have the feeling to benefit from globalization on the coasts in the US, very well educated, and people who have the feeling to be the losers of globalization, the left behind. And unfortunately, what we have seen during the campaign is that it's extremely difficult for these two countries right now to talk to each other.
And here in France, in French we have a word, déclassement, this fear of that you're being left behind effectively. It's not just economics, and it was a lot of identity politics, this election.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's something that struck me when I was a diplomat in the US, is that this mix of economic but also cultural anxieties, you see it right now on both sides of the Atlantic.
So there's all this anxiety, even though on paper the economy is booming in the United States.
Well, yeah, but look, let's not fall for this pundit trap of bipartisanship, Francois. The GOP under Trump has turned into a racist, alt-right, white supremacist party. And the Democrats are going to be fighting this version of banality of evil, albeit homogenized for American consumption, for the next 2 years, regardless of whether one side wants to see it or not. That's the playing field there. There's a civil war going on in America.
A civil war, is that overstating it?
There's enough guns. We've seen the bodies. We're already hearing We're already hearing from the state of Georgia and other states in the United States about voter manipulation, extension cords for electricity to voting machines not brought in, so the voting machines wouldn't work. There's going to be a heck of a dogfight in the state of Georgia. You're probably going to see more.
You're a conspiracy theorist. This is totally deranged and unbased rhetoric. You need to tone it down, seriously. We're not in the midst of a civil war. We have a divided Congress. Government is working exactly as our founding fathers intended, in line with the Constitution. So how about tone it down a little bit? Because you sound crazy.
Let me ask you, Harlan Hill, about the rhetoric we saw from the President of the United States, insinuating that this caravan was bringing dangerous men who were a threat to women, that there were an invasion, unsubstantiated claims that there were Middle Easterners, i.e. Islamic terrorists in amongst them. The conspiracy theories seem to be flying fast and furious on both sides.
For one, if anybody's seen footage of the migrants as part of one of the caravans throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails at Mexican security forces, then it's clear that there's a violent element in at least some of these caravans. But that's really beside the point. We have legal processes for coming to the United States, and you can follow those, and you can come here, and I'm happy. I mean, we have very low unemployment, so I'm happy to let people into this country legally. There is a process. Go through it. Come to the country and offer skills to fulfill jobs that we need, and I'm willing to have you. I don't care where you're from. But just pouring over the border as part of a caravan, it's unacceptable. It's not in line with the law. And the president's right. It is an invasion. You may not like that word, but that's exactly what it is.
No, sir. An invasion is when the Nazis blitzkrieg Poland. An invasion is when Hannibal crossed the Alps. An invasion is not a group of migrants trying to come north to get into the United States.
Is an unwanted, uninvited movement of people into our country, and that's exactly what this is.
They're nowhere near your country,
and we
sir.
don't know who they are. We don't know who they are.
Oh, you do know who they are. You exactly know who they are.
We don't know who they are.
What you are doing...
They can be vetted. They must be vetted.
Francois,
okay, so time out, Mr. Crazy.
All right,
are you for open borders? Are you for open borders? If you are, then just say it. If you're not for open borders and you believe in immigration laws, then there's a process. If you want to change those immigration laws, then elect a different president.
I think we're talking about two different things. On the one hand, there is the immigration process.
No, we're not.
On the one hand, there's the immigration process itself and the argument of how you regulate people coming into the country. On the other is stirring up hate and stigmatizing minorities, which is the argument that was made. There was an ad that was pulled from networks in the buildup to the election day Harlan Hill because it was deemed too racist.
We're not stigmatizing minorities. We're stigmatizing those that are trying to come here illegally, that are breaking the laws, that are attacking Mexican security forces as they move through Mexico towards the United States. We don't know who these people are, point blank. I mean, I don't know why this is so controversial to say that we should be following the laws and that we should ask anybody that wants to become an American citizen to follow the laws. I mean, that's not controversial. That's not race baiting. That's basic common sense.
All right, let's talk about the atmosphere that pervaded during this campaign and where it's going to go from here in with our correspondent Ryan Thompson, who joins us now from Texas. Ryan, it's the day after the Senate race that was arguably the most watched around the world between incumbent Ted Cruz, a former adversary of Donald Trump during the 2016 campaign, who got his support against this up-and-coming 46-year-old Democrat, Beto O'Rourke. On the day after, Cruz has been elected, although by a narrower margin. Is it kind of like the discussion we're having here, both sides claiming victory?
Cruz campaign definitely claiming victory, claiming that Texas values shined through and through tonight, and that that Beto O'Rourke does not represent the values that people here in the state want. The O'Rourke campaign, on the other hand, very optimistic as O'Rourke eyes what he will do next. Of course, he will not go on back to the Senate when the new term starts in January. He resigned from his seat, keeping his focus on this Senate election. But people are discussing what will be next for Beto O'Rourke, and he has not dismissed the possibility of running for office again. He finished his remarks last night saying, "We will see you down the road," and many took that as a sign that he would stand for a much larger office. Some are even saying the White House in 2020, and the fact remains that a lot of what we saw during this hard-fought election in Texas shows that he could possibly do that. I mean, he raised millions of dollars from individual donors, gained national attention, was able to fill stadiums with vast amounts of supporters, and really showed an Obama-esque personality to the world.
But at the end of the day, he lost.
Of course, at the end of the day, he lost, and his victory, or sorry, Ted Cruz's victory really is telling of a trend here in Texas that could be telling of what will happen during the next round of federal elections in 2020. I mean, a much narrower victory than Republicans are used to in Texas by just under 250,000 votes. That's not the 15 to 20% comfortable lead that Republicans here in Texas are so used to.
Ryan Thompson, many thanks for joining us there from Houston. Listening attentively is Hannah Murdoch, a Texan herself. How's Texas changing, and what does this particular race say about Texas?
Well, first of all, this race was the closest one that for a statewide office in 40 years. So already this was big news that Beto O'Rourke got so close. And when you also look at that map that you showed earlier, if you look at the coloring of Texas right now, you've got clear blue spots in the big cities, and then more coming up from the south. And I think that what you'll see is I mean, this demographic shift is just going to continue. One thing to keep in mind, though, is how long it'll take. Because when I was still living in Texas 6 years ago, even, I mean, up to a decade ago, we were talking about the demographic shift that was going to turn Texas blue, or at least purple. And we still haven't seen that happen. So maybe in the next decade. But with more Latinos coming in, the Latinos are generally a younger population. It's possible that it could shift soon.
So, Jérémy Gallon, speaking of predictions, when you started writing your book, at the time, people were saying, "Oh, it's going to be there really will be a blue wave in 2018, and the Democrats will take both the House and the Senate." Of course, that didn't happen.
No, it didn't happen, but when I started writing the book, what I wanted to emphasize was the divides within American society. And this polarization of US society has not disappeared, of course. And what is striking in that we already talk about who will be the next Democratic candidate for 2020. But first of all, they should think, okay, how can we respond to the fears, to the anxieties in the US right now from a core part of the electorate that doesn't just vote Democrat. And I think Democrats are really at the beginning of a long path to intellectually restructure first their software, and in addition, not to fall in the traps that Trump will try to put on their way in the coming years, in particular the risk of wanting to impeach him or investigate him too much, which could consolidate the Republican basis. And then what we have seen...
What we saw with the Kavanaugh hearings.
Absolutely. And what we have seen also during the conference is already putting himself in the position of, I will try to make deals with you. And then there will be the question for the Democratic leadership. Do we want to have a deal, for instance, on infrastructure with Trump? So these are very important questions for the Democrats. And I'm not sure right now that they have all the answers to these key questions.
We're going to pick up on those questions when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're watching the dust settle on the 2018 U.S. midterm elections and looking ahead slightly to 2020. With us to talk about it from Washington, Republican commentator and political consultant Harlan Hill in the studio. Hannah Murdoch, who researches and teaches energy and environment issues at Sciences Po, the French Political Science Institute. Jérémy Gallon, the author of Journal of a Young Diplomat in Trump's America. And Craig Capitis, editor-at-large at TRT World. More than a blue wave, it's a pink wave in Craig Capitis' home state. Pennsylvania had 18 men for 18 congressional districts until now. 4 women winning there. Diversity, who also... in the case of the state races as well. This is from your hometown paper, Craig, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And that is a point that is important. It's too early the exit poll data is still fresh, but it's looking like a lot of women, particularly in suburban areas, did not vote Republican this time around.
Yeah, and hopefully that trend will continue, and it's very good for the country.
Are we seeing a war of the sexes in a way?
No.
With more men voting for one party and more women for the other?
No, I wouldn't say it's a war of the sexes. I would say I've always felt that women are actually, in many ways, more attuned than men to the reality of what's going on around them, and the women I've spoken to back in the States, suburban moms, are furious with Donald Trump now, and the feeling is they've come to the conclusion that the reality is, look, in a democracy you get what you deserve, and you deserve what you get, and Donald Trump is. Is
it about one man, or is it more about these issues like healthcare?
It's about one man. It's about how the President of the United States acts more like a premier, his lack of moral clarity on issues, his treatment of women. These are issues that, resonate among women and also among a lot of men.
So we heard in part one, Jérémy Gallon, Hannah, saying, cautioning us against fixating too much on one individual when it comes to what's shifting in American politics. On this issue of how women voted, is it all about Trump?
I would say it depends, because, I mean, if you take Texas or one of these clear red states as an example, you see lots of women voting for Trump still. But maybe one of the other demographic shifts to look at is the women moving into suburbs. And those in the suburbs, they're voting more Democratic also.
Harlan Hill, you agree?
Well, I think that this is largely overblown. We'll see how this shakes out in 2020, but there are a couple of other interesting anecdotes that I'd like to draw to your attention in terms of demographic shifts. In a state like Texas with Greg Abbott, when you looked at the exit polling, over 25% of African Americans in Texas that cast a ballot for Greg Abbott. In Georgia, Brian Kemp, where he was running against an African-American woman, 12% of the African-Americans that cast a ballot for him. So, I mean, there are some demographic shifts here that go beyond just female voters, where we're actually starting to see that, African-American voters are opening up to the Republican Party and Hispanic voters as well. And so there's a fundamental shift in the parties here as we sort of recalibrate, and it's not just about the geography and what Senate seats Republicans are winning, but what is the makeup of both of these parties and what's the underlying ideology of them? Because in 2016, the president flanked Democrats on a whole host of issues, including trade. And I think that those have long-term repercussions for the makeup of both parties.
All right, so there's policy and there's identity, and the diversity that Harlan Hill's talking about won't just be about gender when you look at the makeup of who's representing voters in the next Congress. Emerald Maxwell takes a look.
The first woman of color to represent our state in Congress. The first woman to wear a hijab to represent us in Congress.
This is Ilhan Omar, Muslim, a former refugee and a woman, now elected to the US Congress for Minnesota, the state which became her home after fleeing the civil war in Somalia as a teenager. She joins Rashida Tlaib, the other Muslim woman elected to the US Congress this year.
This was my time to run and not sit on the sidelines, and so I ran. And so by chance, I'm also making history today, but more importantly, people got something different.
But they're not the only fresh faces on Capitol Hill. In what's been billed as the Year of the Woman, a record number of female representatives have been elected. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is one of two 29-year-old Democrats to win a House seat, becoming the youngest woman ever to do so. A former waitress of Puerto Rican origin, Ocasio-Cortez is a self-declared socialist and has quickly become a rising star of the Democratic Party.
What we are standing up for is what is right. That's right. And we will never be ashamed for fighting for what is right.
There were other firsts too. A lawyer of Native American heritage, Sharice Davids is openly gay, but that didn't prevent her from beating a Republican incumbent in traditionally conservative Kansas. Along with fellow newly elected Democrat Deb Haaland, they've become the first Native American congresswomen.
The result of women, the way women voted, is that the biggest story from these midterm elections, Jeremy Yenel?
I think it's a very important story, and I think it's great to see this young woman who have an incredible personal path becoming elected. Though I think we should be very careful and of not trying to have, on the one hand, the Democrats becoming the party of the minorities and the Republican becoming the party of the white men, white rural old men. Because otherwise you will have a problem of social cohesion in the US. And you mentioned the tension that divide right now US society. I think identity politics is a game that has been played by the Democrats first. Republicans have been very critical of the Democrats because of this. And it was which led to the victory of Obama with a great coalition of minorities. But then the Republicans with Trump have played exactly the same card. But we see in addition that it doesn't necessarily work because, as it was mentioned, a part of the African American voted Republicans because, for instance, on illegal immigration, they can share some concerns that are also the ones of the white people in America. And for it's exactly the same reason why the Hispanics, for instance, in Florida, don't necessarily vote for the Democrats because, for instance, Hispanics from Cuban origin can criticize Obama's opening towards Cuba. So I think the problem of these kind of policies that are focused too much on minorities, well, first, they divide the society, and in addition, I'm not so sure that they work politically speaking.
So it's the same question we asked in part one of our discussion about the Republicans, is how much is people's political intentions about the economy and how much is it about identity?
What is very interesting is that the Republicans have not campaigned so much on economy. You could think that with the status of the economy, very low level of unemployment, very high growth rate, Trump would have campaigned in a normal times only on this, but he didn't do it. he campaigned on immigration, on fears, on identity politics. And on the other end, Democrats campaigned more on healthcare and also on the issue of minorities. And I think this is a real problem.
Right. So, Craig Kapitas, the trap that faced Democrats when they picked their presidential candidate in 2020, spelled out there by Jérémy Gallon.
Right.
Which way should the Democratic Party go? Again, we're still trying to read the numbers from Tuesday's voting. There's some high-profile wins for people on the left flank of the party, but there are also wins for more moderates, depending on where you are. It's a big country, the United States.
I think the Democrats are still struggling, going to be struggling for a long time.
Because we know who the Republican Party is represented by. It's Donald Trump.
Right.
We don't know who represents the Democrats.
Right, and the Democrats are going to continue struggling, trying to find someone. And frankly, I honestly believe Donald Trump is going to win again in 2020 because he has effectively captured the mood, the essence of modern-day America. There's something much more fundamental going on here. It's this idea. You know, America has enemies. The country has enemies. Iran is America's enemy. That's a fact. But what Donald Trump has done is he's created demons. He's created hobgoblins in a country, you know, the Puritans, let's burn the witches.
All right, but
and what he's done is he's demonized people, whether they be migrants trying to get in or whomever, and that.
Right, but the question is, where does it leave the Democrats?
I don't think the Democrats know where it leaves them yet. I do not see a leader emerging.
What kind of candidate is best suited for the Democratic Party in this cycle?
Well,
is it more moderate or more someone to the left?
I think it's a tough call. I mean, I understand exactly what he's saying. That I mean, if you look at why people are voting, what motivates people, fear is a huge factor. Regardless of what it is that people are afraid of, if you play into fear, then it helps to get people out to vote. Also, I mean, more negative messages, we tend to remember those better than positive messages. And so Trump has really succeeded in playing into those.
Harlan Hill, the next Democratic nominee for president, the consensus is we don't know who that will be. Who's better suited against Trump, a moderate or someone more from the left?
Well, I think that in large part, in my gut, I think that people make a decision about who they'll vote for president, not so much based on policy, but does this person look the part? Does he feel like a president? And everybody that the Democrats have thrown up for a long time are largely retreads. Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, so on. They need to find somebody new. They've got to restock the bench. And someone like Beto O'Rourke checks the box in theory. Young guy, charismatic, handsome, and he happens to be progressive. But after last night, he's kind of a guy without a job. And the other rising star, Andrew Gillum down in Florida, lost as well. The two biggest rising stars that were supposed to come out of this cycle for Democrats, that were supposed to restock that bench going into 2020, are irrelevant now. They've got a problem. I don't know where it comes from.
And Harlan's absolutely right. He is absolutely right. The three key election areas last night were Florida, Texas, and Georgia. And as Trump even says, you know, they didn't win, they lost. And as you said it before, they lost. And that counts for a lot in the United States.
We're witnessing something that's on both sides of the Atlantic, which is voters want something new. Donald Trump is in his 70s, but it was the first time he was ever running for office in 2016. So he could portray himself as something new. We've seen here in France, someone who'd never run for office get elected president. Why do people want something new?
I think they want something new because they are disenchanted with the way they have been governed over the last few decades. They have the feeling that politicians on both sides of the political landscape have not bring effective response to their main concern, to their anxieties. But what is striking is that even before the election happened, there were already articles about Gillum running for 2020, O'Rourke running for 2020. And I think it shows a major problem for the Democrats, which is before trying to throw names in the debate, let's see what elected officials are able to do on the ground. And for instance, we should maybe talk more about someone like Phil Murphy, who has been governor of New Jersey since 1 year. And in New Jersey, he has passed a very interesting, ambitious agenda, which is progressive on environmental issues, on gun control, on economic and labor law issues. So I think like the Democrats should first, rather than trying to find political celebrities, find politicians who are able to respond to the concerns of the
on
voters.
Specific issues.
On specific issues. And by the way, I think it's the same in France and it's the same in Western Europe.
One of those specific issues, and I'll put it to you, Harlan Hill, is gun control. There was that horrific shooting in Florida last year. Several governors-elect, the one in Kansas, the one in Minnesota, in Michigan, in Colorado, all of them getting elected on a ticket of more gun control. Is the United States changing?
No. No. I mean, if we're looking at the presidential race or major U.S. Senate races, if, for instance, I'll use one example from last night, Texas. Beto O'Rourke campaigned on gun control. Stacey Abrams in Georgia previously co-sponsored a bill that would have gone around confiscating some weapons. This hurts you in key states. And if you have aspirations beyond just, winning the U.S. Senate or a governor's race, and you want to run for president in this country, campaigning on gun control to that degree is not gonna fly. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
I just want to ask you, Craig Capitas, because in Pittsburgh, where you grew up, you've just had a mass shooting at a synagogue. Does that change voters' minds when it comes to gun control?
It changes voters' minds, but it doesn't change the minds of enough voters. The American Constitution, as hopefully everyone knows, guarantees the right to bear arms. And the tragedy of that, no matter how you want to parse the wording, is that a majority of the American public believes that the Constitution is an inviolable document. It's almost theological, religious, biblical. You don't mess with it. And
why is that?
Well, because of the founders, because of the whole history of the United States. The whole fight for Supreme Court is over liberal interpretation of the Constitution or strict constructionists, as Donald Trump seems to like. But the fact is, the Constitution and the country was founded centuries ago. It needs to modernize. And conservatives don't want to see that happen. And one of the places where it really needs to change is this whole thing about gun laws. But again, I'm agreeing with Harlan twice in one night, probably struck down by lightning. He's absolutely correct. You cannot win in the United States unless you embrace the right to bear arms. It's just a reality of the country.
This regarding of the Constitution as scripture from high up, what were you thinking when you were working there, Jeremy Guénon?
Well, I think it leads us to an interesting consequence of the current election, which will be the fact that reinforcing his majority within the Senate, President Trump will have even more margin of maneuvers to appoint certain federal judges and also potentially to strengthen the conservative side of the Supreme Court, which is right now 5-4 in favor of the conservative, but with two liberal justices, Ginsburg with now 85, Breyer with 80, and who might retire in the coming years. So I think it will be one of the key issues. And of course, we know that the federal branch of the judicial power has a major influence in all these social evolutions, including gun laws and the way the Second Amendment is interpreted under the Constitution.
Do you recognize yourself in the political institutions in the United States, Hannah Murdoch? Do they represent, when you look at the judiciary, at the legislature, are they representative of your country?
It's hard to say. I mean, with the demographics changing, and with now the Democrats have come into the House, I would say that they represent the divides that we're seeing in the country. It's coming back to identity politics. It's, I think the gun control issue is a big one. Earlier this year, we saw what might have been the beginnings of what looked like a revolution among young people when there were shootings in the high schools, but that wasn't able to translate into a larger movement, at least for the time being. Although lots of these young people they keep seeing their friends die, Are they going to keep voting for Republicans? It's hard to say. But I think the gun lobby is too strong at the moment for any of that to change.
All right, consensus on that point. One final question. You were mentioning in part one how Democrats who in the House of Representatives will now have these oversight, these checks and balances that weren't there before, particularly the House Intelligence Committee, things regarding to the Mueller investigation, the ability to subpoena the U.S. president's taxes. And you heard Jeremy, Craig Capita, saying Democrats should not overplay their hand and push things too far. Otherwise, it will simply consolidate that tribal instinct like we saw with the Kavanaugh.
Democrats overplaying their hand? Of course they're going to overplay their hand. They control the Congress now. You know, there's going to be a B-52 bomber filled with subpoenas flying over the White House. You know, they're going to, the Congress is going to inundate the White House with subpoenas on every issue. This is why I said.
So what's going to happen with the Mueller investigation as well?
Well, who knows what Mueller's going to say, but you're in all likelihood going to have another investigation started by perhaps the Intelligence Committee or who knows. Remember, Congress controls the purse strings. So President Trump has to worry about that. But this goes back to this issue, Francois, and I've got to say this once more, that people are afraid to come out and say it because it sounds politically incorrect. There is a civil war going on in the United States. There is, for the heart and soul of the country. And right now, Donald Trump has the upper hand because he has created a terrific economy, low unemployment. All of that is true. All of it's true. Now, the consequences of his type of economy long-term, that's an issue for another day. But people like having a little extra money in their pocket, even if a lot of the polls show that the average American doesn't feel like they're any better. The economy is booming. And that is going to help Trump going forward. But it's also a battlefield in this civil war.
When you look at the types of jobs that are created, they're not all full-time. Some of them are part-time, and so there's also this different class layer too. With maybe this is part of why you see people not realizing that they feel better.
Final question, Harlan Hill: will the 2020 election, will Donald Trump live by the economy and die by the economy in terms of if it's no longer booming, that's it?
I think that is the single most important issue. Something that we've talked about tonight, though, is the importance of health care. If you look at how it polls with Democrats, it's the #1 issue. With independents, it's the #1 issue. And increasingly, it's becoming the #1 issue for Republicans. And so we need to come to some sort of solution. I don't know if the Republicans have it, but he needs that at least going into 2020, some plan to solve this.
All right, we'll leave it there. I want to thank you so much, Harlan Hill, for joining us from Washington. Craig Capitas, Hannah Murdoch, Jeremy Gallon. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Simon Harding.
Hi, Francois.
Simon, first wanted to tell you that there was one state race in Nevada where having a pulse didn't mean you necessarily won because a 72-year-old owner of a brothel is the winner, even though he's died.
Absolutely. I wasn't going to start with that, Francois, but now that you've mentioned it, we might as well go straight into it. Dennis Hoff, he was called, and he's been branded as, you know, brothel owning, a pimp, and that's what he was doing as well. And he is, in fact...
And an evangelist.
And he was, in fact, dead, but he's still been elected to the Assembly in Nevada, and it's absolutely incredible. If we look at this first headline in the Huffington Post, you can see the language of it, the way it's being used. Dead brothel owner from Nevada just won in a landslide. So it's not a small victory. It's actually quite massive. And moving on from that one there, we can then go to the Daily Mail, of course, a very sensationalist paper, but it's making waves also abroad internationally. 3 weeks after porn star Ron Jeremy, prostitute, found with the body of Dennis Hoff. So you kind of get an idea of the kind of atmosphere it's created.
They took the story further, the Daily Mail. More broadly, though, the women, the rise of women in office, that is the issue.
Absolutely, it is the issue, and it's certainly what's been gathering the most attention. The Washington Post headlined on it. Everyone's reacting to this. The hashtag women's wave has really come out in force. And it must be said, with a lot of positive reaction, everyone's quite happy that it's turned out this way. CNN also ran a quite extensive article on the first Native American women to be elected to Congress. And it really seems that there is this shift in politics and this shift in movement which is happening, and it's really been embraced. Of course, a lot of attention also for Ilhan Omar, who tweeted, Rashida Tlaib, you can see there, congratulations to my sister. Cannot wait to serve with you, inshallah. And then the answer right there at the bottom, right back at you, sis. So we can really see that this change, this movement in the generation, and it's really been jumped upon by everyone else. This lady here tweeting, still a lot of work to do, but damn, women's wave, we can do it. Of course, with the very famous cartoon of that woman there, and it really shows the way they're surfing forwards. And again, another tweet which really encompasses that. Our trolls love to tell us to get back in the kitchen. Jokes on them. We took the whole damn house, of course. I think so far, if I'm not mistaken, 95 elected women to the House of Representatives, which is, of course, a record.
Here in France, it's an uphill battle. There used to be only 18% of women just a few years back. It's gone up, but only because the major parties institute these parity rules amongst themselves.
Absolutely, but there is still a lot to do in order to achieve parity, both in the political landscape, but also in the economic landscape. So it's a battle we are just at the beginning of.
Well, another issue that's been actually garnering quite a lot of attention, Francois, is the fact that 3 candidates were indicted on felony charges and were nonetheless re-elected. 3 Republican candidates, Duncan Hunter, Chris Collins and Ken Paxton. And that's also created a lot of wave, a bit more hostile, if truth be told. You can see this tweet here. I thought Iowa was bad, but in New York and California elected 2 fellows. So much for ethics. You can see kind of the terminology. People are really disappointed. Some very sarcastic comments as well. I wonder how many Texans actually realised they elected an Attorney General with an indictment on 3 felony charges. So it really shows kind of the both spectrums. On one side, you had a lot of positive talk in regards to women getting a massive foothold in the politics, and then you have this story, which is obviously bringing a lot of condemnation on it.
All right, we'll continue to follow it. And by the way, the results keep coming in. A Democrat has just won the race for senator in Montana, despite the campaigning there by Donald Trump. So the results, not all of them in yet. I want to thank you, Simon Harding. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.